I want to invite you to join me this morning in a fantasy glimpse into the future of religion. Now, I do not have in mind a prophecy concerning which of the great religions of today will win out in the survival of the fittest. I'm not thinking about religion in a static sense at a particular time like the year 2000 or 3000, but in a dynamic sense concerning growth and change as projected from present trends. I'm basically talking about people, not the institutions that they inevitably build. It would seem that mankind has a blind spot. We delight in looking forward and imagining the kind of world we'll have in the future. In fiction and in the comic books, we describe cities of the future, space travel in the year 2000, computerized systems of education in the ages to come, and so forth. We seem instinctively to know that times change and the world and all that is in it evolves. You and I have seen so many developments in just one lifetime that we look forward with almost breathless anticipation, wondering what's next. We seem to have this forward-looking approach to all things, except in the case of religion. Religions traditionally look backward to other times. We're urged to remember the day when God walked the earth, to find help and inspiration in the prophets of the Old Testament. The tendency through most of the religions of the world is what I call worship in retrospect. Or if religion does look to the future, it looks to a millennium that is really the fulfilling of a concept formulated in the past. And I wonder, could it be that one of the reasons for the unbalance in the world today, giving rise to wars and all manner of man's inhumanity to man, is that while man makes steady progress in knowledge of the universe around him, he accepts the dogmatic assertions that knowledge of the world within him stopped at some time. While science and education are continually evolving, progress in religion comes slowly, if at all. I can almost hear, progress in religion. How can you make progress in religion? How can you progress beyond God's Word, beyond the eternal truths and the great historic creeds? Now, certainly there's one thing that is sure. Truth cannot be changed. But the thing we have to realize is that truth is an ultimate, beyond conscious knowing or verbalizing. No one has the truth in toto. All man has ever had or has today are insights in truth, which must be subjected to continued inspiration and expansion. Some persons were much disturbed a few years ago by the contemporary theologians who were crying, God is dead. Remember that cover in Time magazine that shocked so many people, big black and white letters, God is dead? Some thought they'd never ever see that on a newsstand. Actually, this may have been a healthy period in religion. It reflected mankind's growing unwillingness to accept what I call custom-made convictions and the inability to find help or inspiration from an ancient definition of God. It may well have been Emerson who touched off this religious revolution 100 years ago when he said, when we have broken with the God of tradition and ceased from our God of rhetoric, then may God fire the heart with his presence. And to make any kind of a forecast of religion, the religion of the future, we must look beyond the bounds of institutions and the meager attempts of ecumenical councils and talk of church unity. We must sense the trends of the spiritual quest of the individual. A few years ago, McCall's magazine published a survey of 60,000 readers, which, summing up, showed an overwhelming skepticism about organized religion. Many were shocked about this. Even among churchgoers, this was true. And a few months later, another poll taken by Gallup, which was commissioned by Protestant and Catholic groups together, revealed what was summarized as a severe indictment of organized religion. And they give some figures, which are kind of startling. 86% of the unchurched and 76% of churchgoers agreed that individuals should arrive at their beliefs outside organized religion. And about 60% of the churchgoers agreed with the statement, most churches have lost the real spiritual part of religion. A Catholic theologian, Anthony Padovano, remarked at a conference on meditation some time ago, the religious response that has occurred in the Western world, a revolution that has made us more sensitive to the religions of the Orient, is an understanding that whatever answers there are must come from ourselves. The great turmoil in religions, he says, is caused by the Spirit demanding interiority. Faith is not dying in the West, it is merely moving inside. That's amazing, isn't it? There's a great contemporary interest in spirituality. And we don't mean piety, as the theologians might misread it. And it was not just higher forms of worship in the liturgies of tradition, but the quest for transcendence, the discovery of one's own inner powers. One intellectual in a well-known think tank recently said, "There's a whole new tolerance for the search for transcendence." He says, "I'm surrounded by colleagues who are going in the same direction, who value the same kinds of explorations. A person is no longer an oddball because he's known to be on the spiritual quest. He's even envied a little, which is quite a change in the past 15 years. Now, as a backdrop for our study of the religion of the future, I've reread one of my favorite essays, Henry Drummond's The City Without a Church. Drummond, as some of you may know, was a Protestant Scottish preacher about 100 years ago, who made some tremendous statements, contributions to the broader quest for truth. He had a great vision, gleaned from his understanding of the book of Revelation, especially the statement, the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven. And he says, "I saw no temple therein." This is the city without the church, the New Jerusalem without a temple. It is particularly appropriate for dwellers in urban society because Drummond indicates that Revelation shows that the future of religion is not in an afterlife, but a present life upgraded. Religion, he says, for so long has been otherworldly. And John indicates that the future religion will be engaged in bringing the infinite down into the city life. He says that religion is not an escape from work and wages and traffic of streets and houses and people. It is the key to making them work and work together and seeing them in the right perspective. He says to conceive of religion as a thing in itself, something that can exist apart from life, something kept in separate compartments called the soul, as an extra accomplishment like music or a special talent like art, is to totally misapprehend it. He says it is that which fills all compartments. It is that which makes the whole life music, and every separate work a work of art. But I think if John had lived in New York, he might have said, "I saw a new New York coming down out of heaven." Then you see it becomes a vision of the revitalization of the city, relevant to the reformer, the economist, the politician, as well as the churchgoer. The dawn of a new social order, a regenerate humanity, a purified society, a transformation of the cities of the world into the cities of God. To John, this was not only possible, it was inevitable. To the average person, religion is something you join. Thereby you become a Baptist or a Methodist or a Catholic or a Protestant or whatever. In the Second World War, when I entered the armed forces, I, along with millions of others, was asked to indicate my religion as Catholic, Protestant, or Jewish. I knew I wasn't Catholic. I certainly wasn't Jewish. But I wasn't comfortable with the title Protestant either. Because, as I said, I wasn't protesting anything. So it was a great dilemma. I don't suppose anyone gave too much thought about this, but I did. It concerned me a lot. I'd never had been faced with this before. What are you? What's your label? So, to make the thing simplified, not to drag it out to the extent that I'd have to be discharged from the Army, I accepted the P. So on my dog tag, the inscription P was carried around with me all the time. I was a Protestant. Many others carried C, many others carried J, or whatever. But that bothered me a lot. I thought a great deal about it during the years. What is the difference between a Catholic and a Protestant and a Jew, just to consider three major groupings of world religions? What's the difference? I don't mean difference between what they believe, that's obvious, but difference between them as people. If you could consider taking this group of people, in a world sense, taking away their Bible, their crucifix, their rosaries, their yarmulkes, what is the difference between them? Each person has 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 hands, 2 feet, a heart, a head. They're people, persons, Homo sapiens, physical creatures. If we could only follow this line of questioning, we would discover, first of all, perhaps startlingly, a very simple realization, that there may well be more differences between people within religions than between people in general. So why do we make these great distinctions that separate us apart? It certainly could help to solve many so-called holy wars existing in the world today, to accept people as people. And many of the wars are more holy wars than we're aware of. To many people, religion is synonymous with the church service, a spectacle you witness, a ritual you employ, a prayer book you use once a week, or a sanctuary you enter which is completely isolated from life on the city streets. As Drummond says, religion has been taken from the city and imprisoned behind altar rails, withdrawn from the national life, and then doled out to the few who pay to keep this unconscious deception. Future man may well look back upon this age as the time when people were into playing church, wearing their religion like a vestment to be put on for one day a week and then laid aside. People who prayed to a God out there somewhere, ignoring the experience of the presence. The religion of the future, I believe, will not be centered in churches, but in living. It will not be a way of worship, but a way of life. Its purpose will be not to erect great cathedrals, but to produce good people. And by good, I mean not pious, but integrated people, whole people, spiritually conscious people. In this context, when we have good people at the bargaining tables, good people in the councils of government, good people as teachers, as officials, and as parents, the problems of the world will be easily dissolved. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't have churches. We probably will always need them, but as places of study and spiritual research, not as repositories of final truths. The problem of retrospective religion is that it ends in the church. In the future, religion will only begin in the church. The great purpose of the church will be to teach, not preach, to set the individual free, not to bind him to a creed. There will be a gradual retreat from the concept of the church as the authority for truth, and a movement toward the ideal that religion is a personal quest, with the church acting as a spark plug for spiritual thinking, rather than a fuel pipe of canned theology. The church will give ever-lessening evangelical efforts to converting people from one ism to another, but instead will center its attention on helping people to be transformed by the renewing of their minds. And when John says, I saw a new Jerusalem, you may note again that he said, and I saw no temple therein. This was his ideal. The old Jerusalem was all temple, but John's vision of the new Jerusalem was no temple, but a God-inhabited society. In other words, in time, the person will begin to find the true church within himself, a vital force to turn to at any time. He may continue to go to his church to help him to find and then sustain the awareness of this dynamic inner source for good, and to engage in fellowship with those who do. But religion will have a far different connotation, whereas now religion tends to conjure up divisions of the population into isms of one kind or another, which all too often become barriers, sometimes national boundaries of ideologies that separate people. It is sad but true in looking at the history of the world, the history of religions. The religious squabbles and divisions in religion have been at the heart of most of the great wars that have been fought in the world. Somehow religion has never found unity. It's only found divisiveness. But religion will gradually come to mean what it did when the word was coined in the time of the Greek philosophers. The word is religer, meaning to bind together. This is what religion really means, to bind together. It means unity, oneness, small letter U. The sense of inner communion, common union. So the focal point of all religion in the future will be on unity, small letter U, oneness, fulfilling the age-old Shema of the Jews, Hear, O Israel, the Lord God is one. Now, as we contemplate a religion of the future, we should be mindful of the many obstacles to be faced in this evolution. For instance, we might ask you, is God a Christian? It's a startling question, isn't it? If you have a Christian background, you might be inclined to respond with a resounding, yes, of course, God's a Christian. If that's so, then how do you propose getting the others of the world to agree? Especially when we know that the majority of mankind disagrees with you. The majority of mankind are other than Christians. We might say, is God a Jew? Is God a Catholic? Is God a Protestant? Is God a Muslim? They have the same question. In other words, on earth there's a glittering variety of religious experience. But I think it's important to recognize this seeming separation in religions is basically a division of languages. Religion is a language. Have you ever thought of that? People ask me why in my talks I use the word Christ and some of the Christian terminologies of heaven and so forth. Why don't I use mind, cosmic force, and so forth, or the divine power within? I do that too, but I still find myself falling back on Christian terminologies because it's a language that I grew up with. It's a language that I learned to express things through these words, and it's hard to let them go. But if we can recognize that it is basically a language, and not any great big ideological difference, then we have a whole different approach to life. There's probably no way to absorb all religions into a common theology. It'll probably never happen. The people will be able to translate one language from another and speak to one another, which is not the case today. We may never persuade Hindus that Jesus and not Vishnu should be paramount on the religious horizon, nor to persuade Muslims that Lord Buddha is at the center of their spiritual universe, nor Hebrews that Muhammad is the major prophet, nor Christians that Shinto best expresses their spiritual concerns. Say nothing of the fact that we may have a hard time ever getting Christians to agree among themselves about their own relationship to God. But I think there will come an agreement, a recognition of the human proposition that spiritual resources are inherent within all persons. And that these resources, when summoned, can bring the person closer to his own inner flow of life and can bring the persons close to one another. That the sacredness of life is not peculiar to any one creed. The religion of the future will emphasize man's unity with the great universal creative force, which finds its outlet through the individual. People, I think, will end for all time, their speculation about God. They will realize that God is not something to talk about or to pray to or to define, but God is a presence and a power that can be apprehended and conceived only in terms of manifestation. We may know God in and as the lily of the field, the birds of the air, the sun, the moon, the stars of the heavens. And we can know God in and as mankind. So religious studies of the future may well be studies of self-realization using techniques of self-unfoldment. This will entail letting go of all sorts of false beliefs, calling for an open mind and a receptive spirit. Or we can, if we will, go to our graves with the old view, like the generations of die-hard scientists who insisted that there were no such things as meteorites, or germs, or brain waves, or vitamins. Or we can consign our old beliefs unsentimentally to the past and take up the truer, stronger perspective. In other words, we can be our own children. Thinking of the religion of the future can help us to imagine a time of working with truth in the consciousness of what Thoreau calls the license of a higher order of beings. We might consider, for instance, a contemporary expression of George Lucas's Star Wars, for instance, which is a kind of futuristic religion. If you see the Star Wars as a parable, see the undertone of what's going on in it. He uses the term force, and the idea, may the force be with you. Yoda, the guru figure in Star Wars, emphasizes that the power and potential are within you, not in some outside agency. When Luke Skywalker tries to extricate his space vehicle from the mud where it had become mired down, Yoda calmly levitates it out to dry land. Luke says, "I don't believe it." And that, says Yoda, is why you fail. Yoda is a symbol of your own inner teacher. Every person must become his own guru. Yoda says, let the force flow. Forget your old measures. Unlearn. And Yoda tends to indicate where we're going in religion when he says, the power to do comes through a consciousness of not trying, not doing. You must divorce your actions from conscious control. Let your mind drift. Only then can you use the force. And once you start to trust your inner self, there'll be no stopping you. which is reminiscent of Jonathan Livingston Seagull, which was another fantasy prophecy of the coming of religion. Jonathan is talking to Maynard Gull, the gull with a broken wing. He says to Maynard, "You have the freedom to be yourself. Nothing can stand in your way." Maynard Gull says, "Do you mean that I can fly?" Jonathan says, "I say that you are free." And he raised his wings and flew, and he was healed in that moment. Charles Fillmore said, "There is that in man which, when opened, will place him in direct contact with universal knowledge and enable him instantly and constantly to draw forth anything he may wish to know. This will be progressively unfolded in consciousness as the years go by." Walter Russell says that the universe does not bestow favors on the few whom it seeks out as interpreters. He says it is just the reverse, that the universe gives to those who plug in, that mediocrity is self-inflicted and genius is self-bestowed. He says we should cultivate the silence when we are alone, that the universe will talk to us in flashes of inspiration. Knowledge is ours for the asking. We do not have to learn anything. In fact, all we really need to do is to recollect it, because it is already within us as the reality of life. This was the vision of Socrates several thousand years ago. He referred to education as withdrawing wisdom from within the mind of the child out to where he could examine and use that which was his own from the very beginning. And in the religion of the future, more emphasis will be given to the cultivation of this inner flow than in spoon-feeding the child with information. It will have a great impact on education as a process. In the future, there will be a progressive convergence of medicine and nutrition and psychology and religion. Points of differences will dissolve, and a true science of holism will emerge and become generally accepted. It will become just as common as anything for a doctor to prescribe a workshop in prayer and meditation, and for a minister to recommend a program of therapeutic nutrition, all a part of one whole process. The religion of the future will be based on the ideal of unity with God. We will know that it is not only possible, but essential that every person should have what Emerson calls a first-hand and immediate experience of God. He will know that God not only talked to people, inspired them, and revealed his truth to people in biblical times, but that his presence is active in us today. Especially essential to the Christian, he will know that Jesus did not come to take the place of God, but rather to show us how we might find God for ourselves and in ourselves, even as he had found God in himself. The religion of the future will not begin by defining God, because we will finally admit that every definition leaves out more than it puts in. We will be intensely concerned with knowing and feeling and experiencing for ourselves the immediate consciousness of God. We will know that the whole essence of religion is the consciousness of God. And the ultimate goal of religion will be to become conscious of our spiritual unity with God. This is obviously what religion meant to Jesus. He felt himself to be one with God. To him, God was not a formula to be explained, but a dogma to be believed, or a dogma to be believed, least of all a name to conjure by. To him, God was the wondrous life welling up in his consciousness, constituting in him his true selfhood. And he knew that every person can and ultimately must realize his own essential selfhood. That must always be the basis and the purpose and the object of any religion. The most confusing part of our search for reality has been ourselves. We seem to have many selves, a good self, a bad self, a humble self, a proud self. We say sometimes, "I wasn't myself today." Then what were you? Who were you? We play many parts, as Shakespeare puts it, but we never seem to come to know the one who's playing the parts, the true self. This must be a part of the program of religious teaching, to help the individual to know himself, his real self. We've been slaves to our emotions, to the passing whims of our mind, to our bodies, to our intellects, even to our possessions. In the religion of the future, we will be taught that the body is not the person, but simply the instrument of self-expression. We will discover that we need not and should not be the victims of the body, but that we can and should become the body's master. This is the whole crux of the great emphasis today in dieting and reducing and so forth, trying to become master of the body. Unless we achieve that mastery, all the dieting formulas in the world will not help you one little bit. You take it off, but you'll put it back on just as fast. We must prevent what is called a tyranny of the body by regularly practiced drills in relaxation and inner prayer. where we will find an experience transcendent to the body. So each person will frequent his particular church or synagogue in the future to gain insights and develop the skills to master the body's passions and appetites, its hungers and its thirsts, its aches and pains. A freedom greater than man ever knows today will await the religious devotee of the future as he educates his body to do his will. People will also be aware of what we could call the tyranny of the intellect. We will discover that there's no real freedom for the person who functions strictly on an intellectual plane. We will be encouraged to slip away occasionally from the only guide to truth that we're accustomed to, and to dare to go our own way, into the unseen alone, feeling for the right pathway by intuition. Religion will not be devoted to teaching intellectual concepts, but helping persons to awaken the intuitive process, to experience the flow of his own inner guide. And the church will become a dynamic center of creative thinking, and prayer meetings will become places where dynamic ideas for the welfare of mankind will unfold. The religion of the future will accept the truth of unity of all mankind. It will become obvious that when we know God and know our true self as an expression of God, we will also come to know our basic unity with all that which is of God. As Emerson says, the heart and soul of all men being one, this bitterness of his and mine ceases. He is mine, I am my brother, and my brother is me. After generations of trying all manner of laws to ensure social justice, restraints and barriers for protection, man will be ready to hear the gospel of unity, small letter U. We tend to see in others only the things that separate us, but the religion of the future will help us to turn away resolutely from such surface impressions, realizing that these in no way reveal the true person. People will be conditioned to the loving application of what I call the namaskar consciousness. The divinity in me salutes the divinity in you. This is the role of love. Love is the language of spirit, the key to the unspoken word of truth. More than anything else, religious institutions will be laboratories for the study and practice of the reality of creative love. We will realize with the same sort of seriousness with which we deal with nuclear fission that the absence of love between persons or nations can destroy the world. We will be conditioned to a universal law of love, much in the way we're taught to obey civil law. This law will articulate the principle that maintaining the flow of mutuality and love is everybody's business. This was the vision of Teilhard de Chardin. He says, someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, and gravity, we shall harness the energies of love, and then for the second time in the history of the world, we will discover fire. Above all, the religion of the future will not be a theology. It will not be reducible or reduced to a doctrine written in a book. It will be a beckoning light to follow. It will be a way of life. But of course, the New Age religion doesn't have to wait for a Messiah. We can begin to effect the changes at any point in life. We can begin anywhere, everywhere. As we sing here every Sunday, let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. The future begins with today, and with you and me. The religion of the future can be the future of religion in your life. For as Jesus says, now is the time of salvation. I want to invite you to be still with me for a moment, to extend this fantasy insight into religion to an imaging experience of oneness. Just for a moment, dwell on that word one. It's one of the most dynamic words in the language. As an idea, it's the greatest idea of all time. One. All things come out of one. All things are reducible into one. This is a mathematical formula. It's also a spiritual insight. One. Think of yourself now and identify as one. One person, one creature, one mind. A mind that extends into the depths of a divine mind, the allness of the universe. You're one. One in terms of our oneness with the divine flow, the creative process. But also one in terms of our relationship to each other. Get that thought of one. One consciousness, one love, one integrating process. We're all one. The idea of oneness conjures up the image of a circle, and it should. The circle is wholeness, completion. Paul talks about on earth the broken ark, Shakespeare, Browning, on earth the broken ark, in the heavens the perfect ground. Paul says, we see in part, but when that which is perfect is come, that which is in part should be done away. We'll no longer be separated. We see wholeness, completion. So in order to make this image real, I would like you now to reach out, if you will, if you're not too timid, take hands with the person next to you. Just hold hands. And get the vision, the sense. We're forming a great circle. A circle that's surrounding this auditorium. It would be much larger than the auditorium, but one circle, we're hand in hand together. Get the feeling of this wholeness, this oneness. We're one in consciousness here. We're one in our thoughts and feelings, one in love. What we can experience here, we can carry with us as a possible process that may emanate from us wherever we go. But let us here today feel that sense of oneness. The love that sustains us and surrounds us and enfolds us. The spiritual energy that flows around this circle. This feeling coming from one hand, passing through you, and out the other hand. Flowing, flowing, flowing. A creative, dynamic energy. Jesus says, by this you will know that you are my disciple, that you love one another. When we understand the spiritual insight of Jesus' teaching and his ideals, we know that he wasn't talking about my disciple in terms of disciples of Jesus. He was identifying with his oneness with the divine law, the divine process. By this men shall know that you are a disciple of the spiritual law, that you discipline yourself in the law, that you love one another, that you experience this consciousness of sharingness of love. Now we have a circle in our image here. We're surrounding this whole auditorium with a circle of relationships, feeling of oneness. Now let's extend this for a moment. It would be selfish for us to let it stop here, because the whole world needs this consciousness of the relatedness of unity. So let's, in our imagination, symbolically, one by one, put all of the groupings that we think of as separating people, put them all here in this circle. Religious groupings between Catholics and Protestants and Jews and Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, Confucianists, Taoists, Shintos, all the religions we can think of, put them all in the circle and all the people involved in them. And we want to go beyond that, because we have many ideological and national differences that seem to separate people in terms of their philosophies and their concepts and their prejudices. To put into this circle consciously the Russians, the Nicaraguans, the Libyans, the Arabs, the Israelis, South Africans, and the Irish, the Catholics and Protestants that seem to separate them in consciousness. Put them all together in here. So there are no barriers, no separations, all one, all whole. In the future, the religions of the world will come into such a convergence. They'll become a dominant influence, radiating this unity and oneness among people. So there will be very unlikely to have iron curtains and bamboo curtains and big ideological separations in the world to come. So to all of these now, they're in the circle. You and I, who feel this sense of love one with another, together think and feel Namaskar. Namaskar. The divinity within us salutes the divinity within all of these. Now, this is where your consciousness can help. Include as a part of your image individuals, one by one, coming out of the center, taking your hand, breaking in between you, becoming a part of this circle. So to symbolically give way to that, just let go of the person next to you. Feel that this tie between you is taken up by others, one by one, one by one, one by one. All the peoples of the world, embracing our circle and becoming a part of this great oneness. It's in the imagination, and of course it's our mind. We can imagine anything we want. There's a great idea being enacted this coming summer, an experience called Hands Across America. It's a beautiful thing. People will form a chain of people holding hands across the whole United States. But just for a moment in imagination, let's don't stop there. Let's think about hands around the world. All the persons of the world joining hands together. Think of one another not in terms of labels and of concepts and ideologies that separate, national and ethnic backgrounds, religions. Thinking of one another as people, children of God, one in the Spirit. And following John's vision, when he says, I saw a new Jerusalem, let's say, I saw a new planet Earth coming down out of heaven. And I saw no temple therein, no separation, no sex, no divisions. That there may be love and peace on this planet. Just hold that vision for a moment. With all the persons of the world holding hands together in one circle. Get the commitment that vision, that image, will become a part of your consciousness. That's our blessing to the world today. May we make a commitment to keep a forward, upward, progressive spirit and consciousness. Not only believing in the ultimate unity of religions and oneness of mankind, but a commitment to keep ourselves in the upward, progressive flow of spirit in ourselves. Conscious of oneness with God has nothing to do with labels, sectarian separations, only with relationships. And love is the answer. Feel that sense of gratitude as you respond to my words. Praise God for the truth that makes us free. So be it.